So the first step in doing good business writing is to realize that there's a difference between the writer's perspective and the reader's perspective. And just to illustrate what I mean by that, let's first look at how a writer writes. So when you're writing, you first start out thinking about what you want to write about. So there's a little bit of blah, blah, blah. And probably you're going to delete this later. And then you might put in some background information, because in your mind you're thinking about what you want to write about and what you need to say. And then you start putting in some data, some analysis, and maybe you'll even start putting in some arguments. And eventually, way down here, you'll get to the recommendations or the conclusions, depending on what kind of document you're writing. So what does this mean? This is how your brain thinks. You have to get into it. Your brain uses writing in order to think, and this is the order that you think in. You're sorting through everything in your brain, and then you finally get to the point where you know what you want. So for example, if you're writing a business plan, you get to the end and you figure out, I need to ask for $1 million. That's at the end. Or you're writing a memo to your professor, a case analysis, and you're making recommendations on strategy. You think it through, you think it through, you think it through, and you put your recommendations at the end. That's how you do it as a writer. And there's no problem with that. Go ahead, write like that. Just don't give it to your reader, because that's not how your reader thinks. Your reader wants to know where you're going before they start reading. So the reader wants this to be first. So what is the recommendation? Or the conclusion, or in some cases we can say, what is the ask? So if you're sending an email, it might be an ask. Then you would provide the background. So giving context to the situation or explaining why you're writing or whatever. And then you would present the data and analysis. And sometimes this would be the same section. And finally, you would have the arguments in favor of your recommendation. You don't even have to do anything more than this, but sometimes you want to just add a little conclusion to, again, summarize the recommendations at the end. If it's a 1 or 2 page memo or an email, you stop right after the arguments. If it's a longer document, you add the conclusion to help the reader kind of tie it together. So that's the basic logic. So what you can see is that the sections and the chunks are the same, except for the blah, 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 which we're deleting. Everything else is kind of the same. So go ahead, write how you need to write, and then just reorganize it. The beauty of cut and paste, you just reorganize it and then read it for flow. And then you might change a sentence here, you might have to add a transition, whatever, but you're going to end up with a document that the reader can read and understand exactly what you want. So this is what we call the writer's perspective versus the reader's perspective. The biggest mistake you can make is put a lot of effort into a document or an email or something and have your ask at the bottom. Chances are the person reading the email hasn't gone beyond here. They stop reading because what's the point? They don't understand what your point is. So you're wasting their time, or they have ADD or something, they just don't read to the bottom. But if you have your ask at the beginning, then they're motivated to read the whole thing. So this is not a big deal. And the benefit of sticking initially to the writer's perspective is you don't force your thinking. You're going to get to where you want to go, and you allow the writing process to help you get there. The benefit of the editing process is you get the action that you want. Writer's perspective, reader's perspective. Draft, edit.